Okay, I think we're ready to start. So if you're watching live or recorded, welcome to the launch event of the Humanities Innovation Challenge 2021, the COVID edition. So this launch event, this competition is a little bit different from previous Humanities Innovations challenges. So previously, we focused a bit more on using humanities to build a potential venture. And this time we wanted to open it up a bit more. We're not just interested in ventures, we're interested in any exciting, cool, innovative project that uses humanities research that you've been involved with or that you would like to just explore. It can be based off of your research. It could be an app. It could be unrelated to an app. It could be a social enterprise. It could just be a partnership you want to do with another organization, charity, theatre, etc. So it's very broad this year, with the only focus being we'd like it to focus on the creative industries and the heritage. So to get involved, all you have to do is record a 2-minute video of just what your idea would be and how it relates to humanities research. That's it. We'll be putting out lots of emails to let you know how to get involved. Now, this competition is kind of jointly run by myself, Chris Fellingham. I'm the lead in social sciences and humanities at Oxford University Innovation, and my colleague, Tasha. Tasha, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Tasha. I'm the Creative Industries Officer for the Humanities Division. It's a relatively new role, but really the focus is to connect arts and humanities researchers with the creative industries to foster knowledge exchange or any sort of mutually beneficial collaboration between the two. So great to have you all here.
Brilliant. So that's it. It's basically just any idea you have based on your research. We want to hear about it. If you're unsure, just drop us an email. To launch this event, we have 3 brilliant innovators from the Humanities Division with us here today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves properly. We have Chelsea, Alex, and Abby, who are all going to talk about projects and ventures that they've been involved with. And so, without any further ado, we can actually start our panel discussion, which is going to talk about their work and their experience of this innovative work. So, to get the ball rolling, I'm going to ask, starting with Abby, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Williams, and I'm a professor of 18th century literature in the Faculty of English. And the project that I have developed with a small team in Oxford is called Will Play, which is, well, I'll talk about it later.
Brilliant. Can we have Alex to introduce yourself, and then Chelsea, please?
Hi, I'm Dr. Alex Paddock. I'm a college lecturer at Keble, and I'm also a director for LitHits. And I'm mostly responsible for the curation. And I'll tell you a bit more about that later, but it's effectively an app for reading and finding more literature and literary experience.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Hayth. I'm a final year DPhil in the English faculty. I used to be the research and development manager at Uncomfortable Oxford, which is a social enterprise hoping to foster difficult conversations around Oxford's legacy through walking tours. And I'm also the principal investigator on a new project called The Sound of Contagion, which uses AI, music composition, and narrative to think about how we think about creativity.
Brilliant. So I'm going to launch my first proper question to the panelists, and so Chelsea, you will go first on this one. The question will be, more just, can you give us the short elevator pitch of each of the projects that you're involved in, and just explain kind of what they are, someone that doesn't know?
So Uncomfortable Oxford is a social enterprise which seeks to engage the public in conversations about empire, gender rights, inequality broadly in Oxford through walking tours. I think that's about it for the elevator pitch. And it's been developed over time. There's a fairly good team now, fairly broad team now, and there are lots of different kinds of tours depending on what kind of things you want to be uncomfortable about. And then Sound of Contagion, which is my sort of newest project, is a creative collaboration between researchers at the University of Arts Berlin and Oxford. And we are on Sound of Contagion putting together pandemic texts, plugging them into an algorithm, turning the mad outputs that we're getting into narratives. And we're currently in the funding stage to produce a short film.
Brilliant. Alex, can I ask you to go next, please?
Sure. So Lit Hits, the basic idea actually comes from, again, I'm also part of a small team. And I started working with the founder of the idea, Kirsten Shepherd-Barth, who is a professor in the Faculty of English. It's effectively about finding better time for reading and breaking down barriers to enjoying literature through the use of a digital platform. So we are developing an app, and the idea is that using the app that you are able to select and read unabridged excerpts that fit perfectly into the time that you have to read them. So you might come to it with 10 minutes between, and you can tell that we came up with this idea before the pandemic, between trains, perhaps, or, perhaps more timely waiting in a surgery or other vaccine center, perhaps. But the idea is that you come with the resources that you have for your reading. It's not about seeing reading as something that you have to work to fit in, but instead acknowledging that snatch moments of reading can themselves be really immersive, really rewarding. And we curate on that basis and have been creating a library. And we're also creating different kinds of search terms for that library as well. So you can be really granular, search it by genre or search it down to subject. I think my favorite of our subject tabs is probably potato, which works quite well. I think there might be time to speak about this a little bit later, but we did bring forward some of the resources from Lit Hits in a collaboration with the Faculty of English and the Humanities Division into something called 10-Minute Book Club, which now exists on the English faculty website.
Do you want to maybe do a little bit more on the 10-minute book club, just now you've introduced
Sure,
it?
Yeah, I'm trying to keep it short and sweet. So 10-Minute Book Club is basically the core idea of Lit Hits, of time-defined excerpts, but the idea that you can create a book club around an excerpt, not around a long novel or other kinds of literature, because we didn't just focus on novels. And each week we released a different 10-minute excerpt from a public domain text. It was really important to us that they were free to access. And we added the additional content from brilliant post holders within the faculty who would introduce each text either in written work or in a recorded voice. And we publicized it publicly. The idea was to give people reading to help forge connection during the first lockdown. And we found that there was quite a lot of uptake from school age, especially sort of sixth form, kind of A-level age, from teachers and their students. So that was great to see.
Yeah, thank you. And Abby, could you now introduce Will Play for us?
Right, sure. So Will Play is a project that I have developed along with a partner from the games sector, from a small independent games company called To Play For, and two graduate students in English, Felicity Brown and Rachel Hodge. And what Will Play is a resource that enables, it's aimed at secondary, it's an educational resource aimed at secondary school students. And it basically enables them to message their way through a Shakespeare play. So their experience of reading, in this case, Romeo and Juliet, is that they have direct conversations. It's basically like putting a chatbot inside a Shakespeare play and seeing what happens. So it translates some of the language into contemporary idiom and uses social media references as a way of kind of updating the look and the feel of what of the play for those younger audiences. And through the messaging format, that's it's browser based, so you can do it on your mobile, on your desktop, and it enables students to engage directly with characters through these messages in the play, and through that to do stuff which, like, analyze language, catch up on the plot, think about motivation, that kind of thing.
Thank you. And Abby, I'll pass it on to you again, but can you tell us a little bit about how this idea came about? To what extent did it tie into your own research? And then we'll pass it on to Alex and Chelsea.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, it's weird that it's come more and more to link to my research, actually. It started off as a chance encounter at a workshop with Annette, who'd created this platform, which was about having a chatbot with storytelling potential and functionality, and thinking, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if you plug that into a pre-existing story? How could we explore the multiple stories inherent within an individual narrative? And then as we started to, so I got a bit of seed funding to explore that with other people in the English faculty, and what we hit on quite quickly was how useful that would be in a secondary school context. And then from there, we got a bit more funding to scale it up and create a prototype to see how that worked. And as it developed, I'm in fact a historian of reading. I wrote a book about social reading, how people read together and how that changes what we think about books. And so the way in which it's forced me to think about new forms of reading and what readerly interaction means and shared reading has actually come back kind of full circle to my own research in some quite interesting ways. But it started off as a kind of, this would be a cool thing to do. It's not really my job, but let's have a go.
That's great. Thank you, Abby. Alex, would you like to go next?
Sure. So for me, it was less of a chance encounter, but more of an extension of work that I'd already been doing with Kirsten Shepherd-Barr, who actually supervised my DPhil, which was at Oxford as well. And she had this idea many years ago, actually, and through structures in the university was encouraged to begin developing it. But for me, it has actually, Abby, what you said about this kind of journey back to your own research through the project really chimes for me as well. My own background, intuitively, it sounds very different to what LitHits is, which is in eco-criticism, environmental humanities, and a particular focus on medieval literature. So it doesn't instantly sound as though it links, but for me, it really is about thinking about the impact of place and the conditions of people's reading and the way that can change or be a really important frame for how people are reading. And I've really been drawn to the opportunity to think about readerly experience and the different frameworks that we're using, the fact that those are constantly evolving. So for me, LitHits has been that.
That's great, thank you. And Chelsea, on to you.
Thanks. Yeah, my experience is very similar, I think, to both Alex and Abby's. I have a background in post-colonial literature, and when I arrived in Oxford, I went on the very first Uncomfortable Oxford tour, which was given by the current directors of Uncomfortable Oxford and the founders, Paula Larson and Olivia Durant. And I loved the idea, and I said, can I get involved in some way? And so I became the research and development manager. And then I became the lead on the Uncomfortable Literature version of the tour, which sort of takes participants around Oxford to think about an alternative literary heritage. So there's no Tolkien, there's no C.S. Lewis. We kind of do really different writers. So Dumbledore Marachera, Iris Murdoch, bit of conversation about Woolf. Oh, my sad lamp's turned off. Turn that back on. and wanting to talk about different kinds of a different kind of literary heritage for Oxford, and so that, yeah, it tied into both a feeling that I have about how people fit into a place, and fit into a history about a place, and it tied in, of course, to my post-colonial training. And then Sound of Contagion is far more closely related to my current research, which is my DPhil work on speculative fiction and urban inequality. So the initial idea was to do a collaboration, but then the pandemic hit and we were like, well, let's talk about what this sounds like. And so many of us have an experience at the moment of, can you hear me? Am I on? Oh, you're muted. So we've got that. We've also got kind of a sense of field recordings. So cities went quite quiet, and then they've kind of gotten louder again. So there's some interesting conversation there. There's also the effect of speaking to someone through a mask, and how that can be very difficult in terms of an audible experience of a pandemic. So yeah, and so there was some kind of interest in what pandemic literatures could tell us about how pandemics used to be described, and what we could do with music composition to think through some of our own contemporary experiences. So it's bringing a whole bunch of strands together for me.
That's brilliant. So picking up on this theme of there's a bit of an interaction between kind of the research work and the innovation, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. Thinking about perhaps you as individuals, how has engaging with these kinds of projects changed you? Have you learned new skills? Has it changed your perspective on kind of different things that are possible with your research? What's that journey been like? And then we can start with Abby on that one.
It's such a good question. So for me, it's basically kept me sane over the past year. I mean, the one thing I could hold on to after this year that I've done that's new and been exciting and connected me up with a whole load of different talented people and ideas. And it's felt like a thing which has kept on moving and being new at a point when everything else, well, lots of other things were still or stopped. So that's partly, it's not just a timing thing. I really, really like working in a little team with people where you meet regularly and you all bring your own expertise to it. I like working with early career scholars and I like working with an industry partner. I feel that we all come to it in different ways and bring something new. I think for me, it's been a really creative even though I've done literally no creating myself. I haven't done any of the writing and I didn't do the graphics or the music. Commissioning all of those things and working with people on their final outcomes has been really rewarding. I've loved that part of the process of pulling all the elements together to make something which is more than the sum of its parts. So I think the combination of teamwork, the kind of multi-skilled nature of it, multi-dimensional nature of it has been great. And we all live in a world in which projects take 5 years or 3 years, or a PhD takes such a long time and a book takes such a long time, and to do something which you can get out and into the world and has a utility in a relatively short space of time is just really satisfying. And also, sorry, if I might just add one more thing, I think that being an 18th centuryist, you often struggle to kind of, even though I love my work and I love teaching and I'm interested in the kinds of things that I do, contemporary relevance is not something that springs to the top of everyone's mind when they think of 18th century literature. And actually now I feel like I've got a bit of a stake in debates about AI and creativity or interactive reading or digital learning, what the value of the edtech sector is. And so it's sort of taken me into these new areas, which I have an intellectual interest in now, which I wouldn't have really had purchase on before.
There we go. Brilliant. Thanks for that, Abby. Chelsea, would you like to kind of follow up next, please?
Sure, yeah. I think my perspective is quite different to Abby's, given that I'm a DPhil and so not established. But I have found the transferable skills of these research projects have been really, really useful. Similarly, this keeps me sane. You get the dopamine hit of things happening. You do a tour and people are keen and they ask great questions and you're like, it's working, I've done it. Whereas with a DPhil, you sit and you think for 3 years and then you hope that it will eventually end. and similarly, you know, for writing books, etc. So so yeah, I completely agree. It's really enlivening. It's wonderful to procrastinate from work by working. So I do a fair amount of that, but it feels, you know, it feels productive, and as I say, you know, and similar to what Abby said, working in a small team is a brilliant skill. Collaborating on a creative project is really important and special. Sound of Contagion has given me that. I mean, I say PI, but the three of us are so kind of co-constructive as artists and researchers, and that's been a really interesting experience as well, because very often you bring in a creative partner, but in this case we are the creative partners as well as being the researchers, and so negotiating that kind of sense of how do I position myself in terms of the academic thought around how this project is going to develop and work, and how we're going to, you know, how we might publish. How do you kind of talk about yourself as an academic researcher and as an academic artist? Yeah, it opens kind of new spaces for how this kind of work can be done, and so that's been really exciting and useful to me as well.
That's a fantastic answer. Alex, would you like to finish us off?
Yeah, for me, there's actually something of both of your experiences that really chimes in that I agree. I think that a project of this kind can cause you to kind of re-examine what it is you do as a researcher, and there is this kind of intoxicating sense of immediacy to the kinds of conversations you have, and also I think the necessity to learn how to speak better with people who are coming from absolutely different industry backgrounds or trainings, which, you know, I think that's great, because it's kind of self-reflective. It makes you understand what it is that's important about your work for you as well. Yeah, I think for me, I found it quite sort of freeing. I think one of the researchers whose works, you know, we look at in the kind of the research background to Lit Hits is Rita Felsky, and Lit Hits for me has really been a kind of a turn towards thinking about something as simple as kind of a passion for literature, which I think we can kind of take for granted in our faculty. You know, it's vast faculty, so many people who are very, very into reading. But it can, you know, we can sometimes take it for granted, perhaps almost to the extent that we don't necessarily talk about it that much. But it suddenly became something that in work for Lit Hits, you know, in connections with publishers, in connections with, for example, our app developers, that actually that became one of the most important things we were talking about. And yeah, perhaps it's not so much a skill as an experience, but really speaking to readers has been one of the best things about Lit Hits, even though intuitively I do that all the time with students and with other researchers in the university. But it perhaps reaffirmed the idea of literature and reading together and speaking about reading as itself, you know, a particular kind of energy and driving force. So yeah, I think, to be honest, it has been about the people for me with Lit Hits. And again, it has helped me also reconfigure my relationship with writers, as in having a kind of quality of liveness, I think, as being a kind of relationship in of itself. And, you know, it's something that we've talked about a lot. I wanted to include in my introductory bit about 10-minute book club that for us, it was really important that there was a kind of a post-colonial mechanism behind that project as well. We worked with Dr. Erica Lombard, who also worked on the Writers Make Worlds project. So it was really important that that was deeply embedded there, and that kind of we keep thinking about writers and writerly groups as endlessly changing and transformable, and not kind of relying on fixed ideas of literary communities, whether we're talking about Oxford or we're talking about English literature in general. Yeah, it's very much been about the people for me.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you all. It's great to hear about sort of the rewarding aspects of your journey and the overlap across your experience as well. But would you be able to speak, Alex, I'll start with you first to kick things off, but could you speak a bit more about the challenges you faced during this journey and this process as well?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I think there's multiple. I think one of the challenges, I think, is literally momentum and workload, but that is something I think that, you know, we often talk about with academic work in any case, and fitting these kinds of projects around the kind of the full-time day job, research, teaching, and so on, that becomes difficult. And I think, again, that's a place where, you know, if you're working with people you connect with and click with, then that can be the driving force, which, you know, it certainly has been for Lit Hits. You know, the team we're small, but it's an amazing relationship. The other side of it, I think, is perhaps about the ways in which we think about knowledge exchange and spin out work in relation to subjects within the humanities. I mean, I can only speak to this from a literature perspective, but for us, we found conversations around intellectual property really interesting, because there's a sense in which the IP which we're working for Lit Hits is kind of a literary idea, and that doesn't sit easily within existing frameworks about how you might go about commercializing IP. And I think that there is a kind of disciplinary opportunity to think about those interactions, and, you know, where the very core idea or data that you're working with isn't necessarily something that's quantifiable, and it isn't necessarily something that's certainly not something that's patentable. And it is a challenge, and you know, I think we, all of us, and especially, you know, in lots of collaboration with OUI in this, you know, we really kind of put lots of energy into working that out and working out how those frameworks could fit with Lit Hits. But I think that there is an opportunity in humanities innovation to really think about how you're measuring the successes of these projects. You know, what are we talking about as the measure of the things that we want to achieve? And my sense of speaking with lots of humanities projects, and I think from a Lit Hits perspective, this is the case, is that we may be talking about kind of cultural impact and a shifting in ideas, and that's very, very difficult to measure. But I think that perhaps makes it really, really important. And, you know, we're not at the end of that journey, so I don't have an answer for that, but I think it's worthwhile for us to rethink some of those frameworks, you know, not necessarily just seeing metrics, for example, as the defining way that we talk about humanities innovation success.
Thank you. Chelsea, would you like to go next about challenges with Uncomfortable Oxford and Sound of Contagion?
Sure, thank you. I think what Alex has said is incredibly powerful, the sense of what success looks like for these kinds of projects, because we can't turn it into an app that will detect cancer. And so there's some really tricky challenges around what it means to make a project viable, how to monetize it. You know, part of the work, part of some of these ideas is to make money, and I find money is one of the biggest challenges that I come up against. One, because I am a DPhil student and therefore don't have a salary, and so all of the work that I do on on these projects has largely been unpaid. Although Uncomfortable Oxford has started paying kind of established staff and tour guides, and has done so for the last year or so. Kind of when we were in the startup stage, it was all of us kind of giving of our time and our enthusiasm. Sound of Contagion is all unpaid work for me and for the other two, and that's kind of where we're at with when I talk about, you know, next stages funding, is trying to get funding support not only for the concepts but for the work, because the UK Academy doesn't typically pay researchers for work outside of their you know, their teaching loads, etc. So it's a real challenge to find time to do these extra projects when I could be earning you know, in a part-time job, for example. So that's been a real challenge. I know it's not a very sexy thing to say, but it's the truth of it. You know, I couldn't do this if I didn't have great funding, and I do have 3 other part-time jobs that make sort of doing all of these things possible. So you know, that's the truth of it from a DPhil's perspective. I recognize that it would be different in other circumstances. Some of the other challenges I find are related to the pleasure of doing the project, is that I find I can disappear into the project and then kind of wake up and be like, I haven't done any work on my DPhil in a month. And so that's important to balance. So it's about work-life balance and work-work balance, and making sure that I put in the right amount of time on each thing, because, as I say, those dopamine hits are so attractive, that you want to keep working on the project that keeps moving, the project that has real world impact. You know, it's that perpetual joke, you know, 5 people will read your DPhil, but I can reach 40 people in a weekend with a tour, when we could have large groups of people. This is 2019, a 2019 example, but and then Sound of Contagion, there's we're going to be doing performances, there's going to be people watching the show, there's going to be live music, and kind of like lecture performances, and so that's real world impact that isn't measurable, because you can't ref a group of people in a room who are thinking about how creativity and AI work together, because they're seeing this the strange musical performance and short film. But I think that those are some of the kind of complications of doing this work. So it's very exciting, but also very conflicting in some ways.
Thank you, Chelsea. And Abby, on to you.
Thanks. I'd echo the things that Chelsea and Alex have said. Although I come from a different position and I have a permanent job, I recognise so the IP. I totally agree with Alex that it's really difficult to find a space of what it is, to define what it is that you've created and who owns it and what's distinctive about it and what's just generic. And given that that's a part of a conversation that you have to have if you're considering any further external collaboration, it seems really difficult to pin down. I think one of the things that the others maybe haven't mentioned is the kind of problem of scaling up. It seems relatively easy to get funding for a seed project and a proof of concept. It's turning it into something more than a sample that is challenging, because it seems to me that there are sources of internal funding here that we're lucky enough to have, or some of us are lucky enough to have, that enable us to get off the ground. But then to build from that, it's always going to be a pretty large investment. And one of the things that makes that difficult is that a lot of the funding, that larger scale of funding that's available to academics, is linked to research. But if you're doing a project which isn't really about your research, but is just a clever idea that you and some other people have had and worked up into something which has real world application, you're then in this weird situation where you have to kind of retrofit back on some research questions in order to make it look like a more conventional research application, if you want to go down that route. So that seems complicated. And then in terms of the payment thing, I too, although I'm in a different position, haven't been paid for the work that I've done. And I think that does can create a kind of, well, then it's sort of difficult sometimes to justify the time you're spending on it if it doesn't seem like a real job, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we've got one last question to kind of sort of close out this brilliant panel session. And that question would be, perhaps appropriately, what advice would you give to a potential researcher thinking of doing projects like those that you've pursued? And if we start with Abby for this one, please.
Go for it. Just do it. Look how happy it's made all of us. Although the last question was about how difficult it all is, if you have an idea, just go for it, because it will bring you things that it will connect you and give you skills that you didn't know you could have, and you have no idea how it will play out in other ways in your career or in your thinking or in the kinds of work that you have. So that's not very useful advice, is it? I can't think of any more practical advice at this point. Don't be freaked out by the fact that you're not a techie yourself. I can't do any kind of no programming skills. I think, work out what it is that you bring to it, and then what partner you need and what skills they, what skills they have, and then what's in it for them. And this kind of synergy between those groups is what will make it a kind of brilliant thing. I think I wouldn't worry too much about having a good idea but then not really knowing how the nuts and bolts behind it work.
Brilliant. It reminds me a bit of I think Werner Herzog said when he wanted to produce a film, he didn't wait for the money or the cameraman. He just started, and then everything else kind of followed along. So I think that could be good advice. Alex, could you go next, please?
Yeah, I think it's probably not that practical either, but beginning conversations about your ideas and about your work, as soon as you can, is, I think, really important. I think it would actually be hard to overstate the genuine value and impetus and actual kind of partnerships and mechanisms that have come out of amazing conversations that we've had about LitHits with people doing different projects or people whose research kind of dovetails in some way. I think talking about it a lot is a really good idea, and it also helps you crystallize what it is that you care about, what it is that you're trying to do. So it's part of the same thing. I think it's just, the idea of going for it and being confident in your idea, but also open to, to beginning before you know exactly what it is that you're doing, and sort of knowing that reaching out to other people about it will help you on that route.
Fabulous. And Chelsea, for the final bit of advice on the final question.
I completely agree with Alex about reaching out to people and kind of chatting to people about the ideas. It's kind of that typical research thing. You don't know what you think until you've done it, or you don't know what it is until you've done it. My kind of add on to that would be tap into the available wisdom. So, you're in a university, there are lots of smart people around, and you're not going to have all the answers. It's never a one-man show. These projects can't be. And so while we're kind of three representatives of several projects, there are lots of people around us and behind us that support us and have advised on project applications, have given support. I mean, Abby's a great supporter. Alex is a great supporter. I've gleaned so much from both of them in conversations about how to do this kind of work. So tap into the available wisdom, develop partnerships in industries. So think about what kind of industries you want to partner with and how to start developing those. And Tasha is great for that. So I've been chatting to Tasha about my Sound of Contagion project. So that's kind of what that's a brilliant thing. And I think it's something you need to do quite early on, because a lot of projects require a partnership to measure impact. So partnerships with industries. And then the last one is kind of a more personal one, but it's block time. So if you are like me and you will disappear into your dopamine hit project, then block writing time or block project time in your life. from 7 to 9 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I do this project. And so it can't like sneak into the rest of your life and take over. Yeah, those are the kind of key bits of advice I would give.
Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you, Avi and Alex as well. I know we just have a few minutes left. It doesn't seem like we have any questions from our audience, so I might just close things out. I just want to say a huge thank you to all our panelists, Avi, Chelsea, Alex. Thank you so much for being part of this discussion, and thank you to the audience for joining in. Audience members, if you enjoyed the discussion, you have an interesting or innovative idea, and you maybe want to win a bit of prize money, please head over to our webpage on the Torch site. I think Clara has put it in the chat for all of you, and there'll be some instructions on applying for the Humanities Innovation Challenge. In the meantime, if you have any questions about the challenge or the application process, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me, Chris, and we'll be sure to answer any questions. Thank you all again for joining and being a part of this.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's a wrap. So